Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unconvention. For those of who are just joining us, we just completed a fascinating conversation on democratization of data, building data commons. We are now starting our second session for the day, which is very pertinent to the world that we live in. It is awareness and accessibility of health for underserved women, challenges and innovation opportunities. This is being moderated by Mehak Malik, founder and CEO of UV Health. Over to you, Mehak.
Hi, and welcome everyone. It's my honor to moderate this session today with two very esteemed women who've, played a very crucial role in the state of women's health in India. I'll sort of start off by just introducing them and their credentials, and also want to start on a quick note about where the state of women's health in India looks like. So to introduce Dr. Vishakha Mangale, she is the founder and COO of Omics Research. She's also been, an active life sciences and healthcare diagnostics professional. She's been advising many entrepreneurs, especially around product development, has been a senior advisor at Wilgrow. And she holds a PhD in endocrinology and reproductive biology, which is very pertinent to the discussion today because we will be talking a little bit about women's reproductive health too in this topic. So, very pleased to have Dr. Vishakha. And to introduce Dr. Kalpana Apte, she is a woman leader who's been working very closely on the front lines of sexual and reproductive health rights at Family Planning Association of India. She's been passionate about, women health issues from a very young age, and currently, she serves as a MD of FPI. So thank you both, Dr. Kalpana Apte and Dr. Vishakha, for being here and making the time for this very important discussion.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So just to shed some facts, right, before we get into the discussion about women's health, let's look at the state of outcomes, right, of women's health. About like 800 women die every day because of preventable causes across the world, and 20% of those women are from India. There are a lot of issues when it comes to women health. It permeates all sort of phases of their life. Starting with nutrition. Over 50% of the women are anemic. Women are generally, more vulnerable to poor nutrition in all phases of their life. And then if we look at adolescent health and reproductive health of women, again, the state of outcomes in India is very dismal. Breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer. Women are not aware about um, early detection and screening, etc. So, and then there is also supply side challenges that affect women. If we look at, just the healthcare system in India, we see that it's strained for capacity for sure, but it's also negatively, biased towards women in that nearly two-thirds of the frontline healthcare workers are men. So I think like what I want to discuss with you both today is, what are the challenges? Where are we? Like, where is the scope to make changes? How can we really, in different ways? How can entrepreneurs, medical professionals, like people from every aspect of life, how can they contribute to women's health? So, let's first start by, just talking about the challenges, be it accessibility, be it preventive health, be it supply side. And I want to open it up to both of you to, share your perspectives on, where you see the biggest gaps right now.
Sure. So I can give my opinion. I think in terms of challenges, access is a very big challenge. When I say access, access can be defined as physical, economic, or socio-psychological access. In different life stages of women, there are different, sexual and reproductive health issues that they face. There is menstruation, there is fertility, contraception, pregnancy. Then there are chronic health issues like PCOS, endometriosis, and then finally menopause. So throughout the life cycle, women in India are vulnerable to the health challenges, and more than health challenges, healthcare seeking behavior, which could be again brought back to how much aware they are and what kind of access issues they are facing. If you talk about geographic access, we know that healthcare infrastructure in our country, there is a very big disparity. Rural versus urban healthcare infrastructure is very different. Or say in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, the infrastructure is much better than tier 3, 4, or in villages of India. This is classic example of accessibility issues faced by women in terms of physical sense or geographic sense. And then we have again economic issues. Economically underprivileged women of both urban and rural setting have less accessibility. Talking about socio-psychological challenges, we have gender bias, then we have social taboos, like not talking about gynecological problems, and not discussing these things openly. Since we are talking about you know not talking about these things openly, I remembered this very eye-opener study done by Dr. Rani and Abhay Bang in Gadchiroli district, which was published in 1989. This study dealt with issues of maternal and gynecological morbidities in India, and it was a real eye-opener. So it was about whooping 92% of the women in this study had more than one gynecological or sexual problems or diseases rather. And what was more alarming was only 8% of these women sought any gynecological care before they participated in this study. So things have changed in last few decades, but there is immense amount of work still needs to be done in terms of awareness and access. Um, Most of maternal deaths are preventable, I think, through awareness, through improving access by providing adequate nutrition, proper health care, and also presence of skilled birth attendants during delivery, and to provide some emergency obstetric care. I think the technology can really offer a revolutionary opportunity to strengthen the capacity of healthcare workers who are working on front lines. It can also expand the coverage and improve the quality and timeliness of delivery of critical maternal health care in prenatal as well as in antenatal services. Coming to gynecological screening programs in India, they are far from being popular in lower socioeconomic strata or in rural settings. We see that they are gaining momentum in cities, but they are being used by only very limited population. So, for example, I mean, for many women who can see that they can feel that there is a lump in the breast, but they still do not seek gynecological intervention, and this could be attributed to just lack of awareness of what this lump could represent, or maybe the social stigma of being rejected by the society or by the partner. And then there is a fear of losing breast. It is also taboo talking about such things, talking about these health issues, gynecological issues. And last but not least, lot of things lie around our infrastructure. So we have lack of crunch of trained resources and access to healthcare infrastructure in rural areas. And also, I mean, screening programs require some of this infrastructure, so they are preventing all these causes are preventing from mass dissemination of information, mass screening, etc. Having said that, I'll also say that this can be turned around using technological solutions.
Absolutely. Yes, over to Dr. Kalpana to also shed some more light on the challenges as well.
Um, I think Dr. Vishaka has made my work a little easier. But what I wanted to say that speaking about women, we must realize that being a woman biologically and socially is a little more complex because socially we know, and Dr. Vishaka has touched upon the socio-cultural roles of a woman in the society, and being that gender itself being even referred by many people as the second gender, or someone who's a little lesser, as it were, than the patriarchy really makes being a woman very difficult task. Biologically, women have more complexities and then being pregnant, and the whole reproductive cycle of menstruation, and then all of that is additional to anything else. And that brings pregnancy and then delivery. And so let's understand that being a woman in itself is a very complex existence because of the biology and because of the context, social context in India and in South Asia that we live in. So we must first understand that. Let's bring it to another technical definition. And we always think that being poor is income poverty. You know, if you have lack of money, that means you are poor. But I would like to use a wider definition, expanded definition, which is Swedish Development Authority, SIDA, they say. Their definition is that actually poverty is not only lack of income, but poverty is lack of opportunities. So, India is a young country. Statistically, 2011 census has told us that most Indians are young people, and these young people, among them the young women, young girls, that really is the big cohort, big group of people who seriously lack opportunities, who seriously lack resources. And this is the group which is actually the future of the country. So, the face of poverty in India is a young girl who lacks opportunities for education. It starts from there, or even let me go before that. So, young girl in India starts on a you can say lesser footing for nutrition. If you were to address, and I will ask you to take this test, anyone who's listening to us, please take this test. Go to any class of any tuition classes are there, or any school classes, online classes where girls and boys are together, and ask a simple question: how many of you had breakfast today? Typically, the hands up will be boys and not girls. Typically, you can ask it to anyone. And that's where this starts, that there is the nutrition, you have lack of nutrition or not adequate nutrition. Then you will, I know this will spark of debate that women, girls want to be thin and whatever, but then that's lack of information to have good nutritious food, to be healthy, then education, then working opportunities, to be treated like, when we say no means no, those kind of opportunities, you know. So I'm saying that being a woman and a girl is extremely challenging in any case biologically. Add to that the filters of the socio-cultural norms, and you really have a very, very challenging situation. And therefore you will find that ill health and hospitalizations and also early deaths are all related to sexual and reproductive health issues. You have touched upon cancers and on pregnancy related deaths and on so many things. So I will stop here. I've spoken much. I think we can explore so much of it moving further when we talk about challenges.
Absolutely. And I think just to quickly add to that, I think there's also this mental conditioning that starts at a very young age, the way a girl is brought up versus how a boy is brought up, right? Like a girl is just taught traits like patience and silence and like, not voicing, not being active participant in decisions or just being an advocate of their own rights. And that's just sort of continues to prevail as they grow into adults because that's what they've observed, growing up in their surroundings too. So I think that kind of also, like, it becomes an issue also of like not just giving education, but also helping change the mindset of women in terms of how they perceive their own like health rights too. So yeah, like I think taking this conversation forward, like we've talked about the infrastructure challenges, we've talked about outcomes. What I want to sort of focus on is how does this affect like young underserved girls, and how can they be influenced through solutions like technology? And maybe we can talk specifically about women who are in the adolescent to early like adulthood age, like say 13 to 30-year-old age group. Like how specifically is this age group underserved as of today, and what are the opportunities that can be explored in working with them?
So, shall I go first, Dr.
Yeah,
Vishakha?
Yes, please.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Go.
So, Dr. Vishakha and I have done a lot of panels together. By now, they're adding up. So we have a good synergy. So I was thinking of this. This is actually two questions. One is that what are the specific lack of opportunities? And I would say that the lack of opportunities are fundamental to young girls and young women, and that is most fundamental is to the opportunity to take their own decisions or choose for their own self, and then that is added to by lack of information about their own body, about growing up, about healthy normal things that they can expect, attraction or liking or crush or those kind of things, bodily changes, about so there's this whole gamut of sexual and reproductive health information and education which we can address through comprehensive sexuality education modules. And then how do you impart that? There could be many ways to reach, and then that's where technology comes into the place, where you can reach this very critical crucial information with life skills to young people in their language of their choice. I think that is one very clear pathway of lack of opportunity. And then how do you fulfill through technology something that is such a simple thing for everyone to know? Today, internet is accessible by everyone, almost everyone, I can say, or at least it is shareable. If you don't have a device, then you can share a device which can be of your friend or someone in the family. At least one smartphone per family definitely does exist. And under these circumstances, looking at the mobile penetration, mobile connectivity, even in the rural areas, I think this is an opportunity that we need to utilize to the fullest extent that we haven't been able to do. There's a clear, very simple, and a very clear pathway that I can mention. And all sort of education and sharing of opportunity platforms which tell women what kind of jobs are available, what kind of online learning free is available for them to upgrade life skills, how they can join various interactive workshops which teach them to say no means no. You can't just tell a young girl that no means no. She needs to be equipped with some kind of tools, management skills of that situation. Those kind of workshops can be done through online and equip a girl to really deal with these kind of challenges. That's what I will stop at. There are many more things, and I think Dr. Vishaka could add to a lot more than what I have just said. So I'll
Yeah,
stop.
yeah, certainly. I think Dr. Kalpana has covered most of it. What I would like to add is in India, we have observed that, by the time woman gains autonomy, she is in her middle age. So the most suffering group is, the children, the girl child during her when she's becoming an adult or adolescent, and in her early young ages. So that's the very vulnerable age when there are a lot of issues in terms of nutrition, in terms of the health issues, and then they start facing all these things of menstruation will start during adolescence and things like that, and because of social taboo, lot of these things cannot be discussed. But fortunately and unfortunately, we are living in times when access to cell phones and social media is more prevalent than access to basic stuff like education and healthcare. We can really tap this potential of the cell phones and e-education. We can really build content which for reproductive and sexual health, discussing reproductive and sexual health issues in vernacular, and it can be disseminated to smallest of our rural areas. There is partnership that needs to be done with schools or with colleges or with workplaces where these young women work to disseminate this kind of information, to share this kind of information, and I think we'll get there very soon.
Absolutely, and that's the hope. So, I think I completely resonate with what you both mentioned in terms of how specifically women lack opportunities, and you know uh, what are the ways or avenues that individuals who are looking to make a difference in this space can exploit, especially technology. I think one thing that I want to say as an entrepreneur, also working in this space, is there's so many nuances, when it comes to access, and the taboo also becomes an important piece in building the solutions, and keeping that into account and creating sort of safe spaces is definitely an important uh, criteria in my mind. And that sort of brings me to the next sort of topic of this discussion, which is what are the innovation opportunities that entrepreneurs should focus on? Right. And there's a lot to do, all the way from awareness, education, accessibility, to actual quality of delivery and outcomes. So we can maybe talk about solutions across the spectrum, and we can discuss the where are the gaps, and if you can bring your perspectives from what you've already seen happen on the ground, as an entrepreneur, Dr. Vishakha, and as someone who's been driving community efforts at FPI, Dr. Kalpana. I would love to know what's your takes on innovation opportunities for entrepreneurs. um,
Sure.
Feel free to yeah.
Okay.
Shall I go
So,
first, Dr. Kalpana?
shall, shall I speak first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. So, actually, Dr. Vishakha should speak first, but I can say a few words, and maybe if there is anything I could speak again if required. But I think between us, we'll wrap this up. Um, what has happened is, really speaking, the innovation field in medical devices and technology has been a very rapidly evolving field in last 10 years at least, that we've seen. When Dr. Vishakha will agree with me, when we were both doing our residencies, maybe at that time, we could never imagine what is there today. I saw the urine pregnancy test while I was doing my residency, and that was a very huge innovation, that we could immediately do a urine pregnancy test and get the result. And same is with the ultrasonography, and so many things just came in the early 90s, if you will see. And today we see that all of this, and most of this, is in the hands of the user. So technology and biotechnology has made progress with leaps and bounds. However, now the important thing is that the technology needs to reach the hands of the person who wants to use it. And we should not just think about innovating on a big, huge machines. For example, and if we had our, there is nothing impossible. If we had our way, I would say that let's challenge innovators to see that can you innovate with a device which can be used by women to scan their breast cancers or a lump, and we don't have to have that huge mammography machine which is so painful.
Correct.
Can that be done? So those kind of things, the technology in the hand of either the woman herself as a self-care model of the WHO, or at least if not, then that not in a big hospitals, but then the technology in the health in the hands of the family physician, who is much more accessible, and a woman can walk across and go to her family physician. No need to have a technology which requires very special training, a very special technician, and 5 years of medical specialization. What we really need is that the innovation needs to be thought in a way which can be made available to people in their hands, like classical diabetes care that we see today, or we see hypertensive care where people have do it yourself devices. And that's where the problems, of course, are many, and we can have another discussion that what are those problems for which we can innovate. And we just done some spectacular work together with the innovators in India. We want to take it global, really. We are hoping that we would replicate this model first on the South Asia region level, and then we will have innovators coming from countries which are beyond India. So, stopping here and requesting Dr. Vishaka to please add more technical and biomedical technology related
Sure,
issues. So,
sure, sure, Dr. Kalpana. So, I think Dr. Kalpana has touched most of the points here. In my opinion, first and foremost, we need to, generate tools for awareness and sensitizing our societies of, women's health needs. I'll give you a simple example. During the COVID times, this year when the lockdown began on 24th March, sanitary napkins made to the essential list only on 30th March, which means that imagine the plight of women who had not stocked up for this need during this week. Uh, what would have happened to them? So innovation is necessary, but in terms of awareness about women's needs, women's health need, and like we earlier discussed that cell phones are something that can be used for dissemination of information, advertising about um, all these things, and I think Dr. Kalpana mentioned about the challenge that was run. There are few things that eminently came out of that challenge. Definitely, menstrual hygiene was one of them. Menstrual hygiene is, there is eternal need to develop products for menstrual hygiene, which are obviously cost effective, and the disposal needs to be taken care of considering the environmental factor. Disposal mechanisms are very important, and that can be looked at by the innovators, because we do not have a widespread mechanism for disposal of sanitary napkins, and it's much needed. Coming back to health screening programs, and like Dr. Kalpana said, that we need some simple solutions which can be handed over to clinicians or caretakers, than big infrastructure requirement, which cannot be deployed in primary health centers. So, talking about technology, I know companies like Nirami who have successfully developed breast cancer screening technology, which is very simple and easy to deploy, and does not require skilled personnel for screening of breast cancer. Similar innovation can be brought about in the field of other screening programs, like for screening cervical cancers. So cervical cancers currently are screened mostly using pap smears, which require a cytologist to look at it, and very trained technicians to do these things, and microscopes and things like that. So if some of these other screenings can be made visual screening test based, new innovative methods can be applied, and these tests can be made more visual, then they can be adopted in a better manner in primary healthcare setups that we have in the tier 3, 4 cities, or in rural India. Another thing that I would like to add in terms of current innovation in terms of AI that is happening is, I know about this company called 1MG. They have this AI model of doctor consultation. So around 20% of their consultations are done by a AI tool, actually, AI doctor. Uh, and then the results of this are then validated by an actual doctor, validated or invalidated by an actual doctor. So something like this can, this type of model can be deployed, in our rural setup, or where there are, no doctors or gynecologists, just to do a preliminary intervention or preliminary check. Then another area which had come up was definitely, there are quite a lot of unsafe abortions in our country which lead to, infertility or maternal morbidity and mortality. So if women are empowered with early pregnancy detection, ovulation monitoring, etc., then they can they will be empowered to plan their families, and we can definitely bring down the mortality and morbidity rates in our country. So I think these are some very key areas which can be looked at in terms of innovation today.
Absolutely. And I think what these ideas make me think about is actually that I feel like women's health is generally under-researched field. When we talk about how and why, like nobody has thought of, like, a way to do cervical cancer screening without it being invasive, or the work that Nirama is now doing with breast cancer screening too. That just goes to show that, like, even when it comes to like biomedical engineering and medical innovations, like more R&D is just needed. More money needs to go into research for solutions that are building for women health challenges. And I think this brings me to my next sort of chain of thought. Like, we've talked a lot about the role of entrepreneurs as well here, and we've talked about the importance of awareness and screening. And one thing that I was just thinking about is the role of the government, right? And it's a public health issue too. I was actually reading something that sort of disturbed me a little bit. It was an anecdotal account of a woman living in Telangana where, she couldn't get access to emergency contraceptive pills for like over 2 hours. And many pharmacists asked her for prescription. And even though, like, you're technically, it's not mandatory for you to have prescription when you're accessing emergency contraceptive pills. So there is this issue of like what happens at the grassroots level, right? Like there might, you know, be issues around state governments having their own sort of philosophy around, or certain sexual and reproductive health issues, and that becoming a barrier to access ultimately at the last mile. So do you have any thoughts like on what role the government and the public sector can play here as we think about women's state of women's health, especially underserved women? Yeah.
I think I'll let Dr. Kalpana go first.
Thanks, Dr. Vishaka. I'll just, with your permission, Mehak, I will go back to the previous question because a thought triggered in my mind. And I'm sorry, I know the conversation has moved forward, but it's an important thing to talk about the innovations. One of the biggest thing I have felt in my 30 years career in the field of sexual and reproductive health, and particularly for family planning, is something that there is so less work done around contraception for men. We keep saying that there is so much there are so many opportunities within women's biological system, reproductive system, that we can break the cycle of either ovulation development or sperm meeting the ovum, but then there is not much work done, and we always hear of so many challenges when we cannot develop a solution for men apart from condoms, and maybe there is Risuk has just come in. But I think that these are some of the traditional areas where Why only women have to bear the responsibility for contraception all the time? There are so many men out there who would want to use a contraceptive method, but then they are, why we can't find a pill for a man to take? So these are some of the questions that researchers must look into the reproductive biology and find solutions to see that there is a contraceptive mix also available for men. And similarly, the within ill health also, if there are delivery systems for medication like a patch or a ring or those kind of things, which will be very important to see that even men become a partner with women in many decision making or taking the responsibility, at least in sexual health, and keeping health healthy, and not really becoming even ill, ill and passing on the infections. So this was one thing that I have felt always very strongly, that we somehow have not been able to bring that kind of solution. Now, coming back to the question that you were saying, we must remember that health is a state subject, and therefore organizing healthcare services also largely gets influenced with the infrastructure available in that state, the cultural mindset of the people, and how things get basically organized. If you see, and I will come from only the contraceptive practice perspective, if you see that in southern states of India, contraceptive prevalence is quite good. The average family size is less than 2 children per family, because the biggest contraceptive choice is sterilization, and now much more these days is postpartum contraception, IUD insertion, really. But if you see to the north, if you see to the high need areas where the health infrastructure itself is weak, their contraceptive acceptance and average family sizes are larger. So it's not, I don't, so, and I've worked with all state governments. So let me say that, first of all, very honestly, state governments and even the central governments come from a position of very much commitment. They would like to do the right thing. We've seen it, and otherwise you couldn't have seen the progress that has happened in last 10 years. This year's census is going to show amazing results on many good parameters, just as our National Family Health Survey has shown amazing results on contraceptive prevalence, on so many other good parameters. We see progress. That's only because the government is committed. Now, there are unfortunate and very many ground realities where really women are not able to access. And that comes from what Dr. Vishakha spoke right in the beginning about access issues. The access issues do get impacted upon even when there is a good program. And you know, there is a program, there is the emergency contraception pills across India should be made available over the counter. This is an over the counter, a 20-year-old decision of government of India. So I think it is a local level anecdotal issue, and that's where continuously I think orientation of the people who are involved in these kind of decision making, influencing the policy makers must come in, because they also come from a perspective, and that perspective is not always influenced by legality or right space. So I'll stop here and request Dr. Vishakha please to.
Yeah, I'll answer this question more from technology standpoint for entrepreneurs to what can be done in terms of this, or what government is doing rather. Basically, uh, things have changed. Like I said, from 1989 study of Abhay and Rani Bang till today, we have seen a lot of changes because of a lot of schemes and programs that government has worked on. For entrepreneurs to be able to work on healthcare issues of women as well as general healthcare issues, government has done quite a bit. I would say that in our country, all over India, we have lot of incubators that have come up, bio incubators that have come up. Organizations like Wildgrow itself are doing a lot in terms of people's health, They have verticals which manage, innovators and support innovators in terms of mentoring them, in terms of innovations that can be quickly brought to market and things like that. So in Bangalore itself, there are almost four incubators and bioincubators that have been set up by Government of India. There is Bangalore Bioinnovation Center in Electronic City. Then we have CCAMP, which is in GKVK campus. Then we have India Knowledge Park. So other than in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, Pune, and in many cities in India, Government of India has set up incubators which will support a lot of innovation in terms of health. There are specific programs. There are BIRAC programs which are specifically for innovation for women health and things like that, where innovators can apply for the grants and get some good amount of money for developing products, for developing innovative technologies which can be tested on ground. And more importantly, I'll add that recently when government announced the budget and thrust on Make in India initiative, last year there is a program that is launched which is indigenization of diagnostics. It was launched in May 2020, and this initiative is actually located again in Bangalore in campus, where innovators can be supported in terms of testing their prototypes, testing their products, and starting manufacturing in India. So there is a lot of thrust from government side in terms of building innovation around health and supporting women health, I would say.
Absolutely. No, it's really good to know for all those who are watching and are entrepreneurs and are working in women's health research. These are some really good resources that you can actually look into to get your initial funding that'll help you establish proof of concept and go to market. There's one more question that actually, is coming from the audience, which is there are many health startups out there doing good work in hygiene, cancer detection, and much more. Why are they not able to scale up? So like where does that break down, from basically like having that initial proof of concept or a solution that is viable to really taking it to the mass market?
I'll take this question first, Dr. Kalpana. So it all boils down to quality, I would say. That's the first thing. A lot of things in terms of medical devices and the care provided boils down to the quality. And basically, until now, we have not had enough infrastructure for health, and similarly, we didn't have enough infrastructure for building healthcare, medical devices, and other technologies. So now there is, like I said, now there is a lot of thrust on this with this Make in India initiative, and I hope to see that there will be much needed change that we will see in terms of
I think also, just to add one more thing,
yeah.
are you speaking or did I jump in? Sorry. Were you?
No, no, please go ahead. Yeah, good.
No, I just have one sentence to speak, nothing more, because this is not really something that is my area. But all I can say that the sharper the problem identification would be, the solution would be accurate to touch that kind of applicability. If you make it too broad, and if you have to also think that it should be the solution, I think should be something that can be used by many and not a small group of people. It should be the solution if it is universal, simple, and able for people, then users become bigger, and then you can take it to scale. That is what I would be able to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
Um,
Milgrow is doing a fantastic.
Absolutely. And I think I can just say that women's health is becoming a very important area in the industry for investors. So, for anybody who's actually thinking about any ideas in the space, you should, again, speak with organizations like Willgrow because they're very, last year they ran a program which they co-sponsored with the Family Planning Association of India, where they worked with closely with like 15 innovators that were working on sexual and reproductive health care in India. So if you are one of those entrepreneurs, like there will be opportunities to get involved and hone your model to a point where it can become it can have a stronger fit with the market and be better positioned for scale. um, Another question that I'm picking up from the audience here is about sexual health. um, the question is, how can women's sexual health be propagated in a rural setup where it's considered a taboo?
Again, this is a question again around the access only. Essentially, like we said earlier, that innovation of digital health solution, generating reproductive and sexual health content in vernacular languages will really help. Partnership with local schools, colleges or workplaces of women will allow to create more awareness and dissemination of information. Access to cell phones, social media is much wider. Basic healthcare might not have reached our villages, but cell phones have certainly reached our villages. So I think we can exploit this potential to the best and make use of it.
And to add to that, I think sexual sex happens, right? That is revered when it is within marriage for procreation. But somewhere it is a huge taboo again to talk about it and to understand that, like all biological functions, this also needs to have health of mind as well as health of body of both the people, and it should be free from coercion and violation. And I think that is where it comes from, that the rights discussion about women's sexuality is a taboo. It's not so much sexual health. Most times it's possible for healthcare providers, and we also use the pathway of reproductive health hidden. We hide, kind not hide, I would say. We can slide in sexual health related issues within the broader umbrella of reproductive health. But when it comes to the rights, sexual rights, I think women as well as men, as well as transgender person, young people, everybody, they do exercise this right, but often enough they don't have enough information. So the first and the foremost thing would be to reach the information on sexual health, bodily functions, on pleasure, to the people who are getting into these behaviors, and to see, to respect other partner, that those fundamental information sets are not reaching, and they are so much couched within the socio-cultural context, that I think first and the most basic thing is to reach the information, right information, and the ability of that person to interact with a healthcare provider on these issues is extremely important. And young people are not really they are not a single group, they are heterogeneous group, they come from different diverse background. But on this issue, that is the information and ability to interact, ask questions, and articulate your fears on sexual health is something that is vulnerability is common to across all socio-cultural groups. A rich boy who is studying maybe in a very high Ivy League school or college is as vulnerable to ill information, misinformation, as a poor young girl who is probably not even able to go to school because she has to look after her siblings or maybe work. Lack of information and accurate information, and lack of a trained provider who can provide you with your specific question, I think is the biggest cause of vulnerability around sexual health in India. If we are able to crack this one, then I think we would be reaching another layer of sexual health, a better sexual health for everybody. It's such a complex thing, and it impinges upon so many outcomes. If you have a good sexual health, good sexual behavior, respectful sexual behavior, then a lot of unwanted pregnancies, infections, genital infections can easily be avoided. There will be more cordiality and more, uh, you can say, a good couple relation between them, spacing between children. So a lot of things fall in place if you have healthy sexuality. And I think that is what we owe it to ourselves to find solutions which can make it easily possible for everyone to seek answers to their individual questions. This is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really resonate with what, like, you said about this, like, sex happens, right? It's a very common part of human life. So normalizing that conversation in different contexts and environments becomes so important. And, on one hand, there is a role that schools have to play in creating a safe space and educating kids from a young age about their bodies and their rights. But also, I think at home, parents' responsibility in educating their young kids about very simple things like good touch and bad touch at a young age, becomes so important. And I think uh, like there is a need to like normalize this conversation, and like also move away from not just looking at harm reduction, like let's prevent pregnancies, or let's prevent like STIs, because that is important, of course, but also like giving people, making people feel normal about it and removing the taboo, because that kind of ultimately is the root cause of why this has been such an underserved area within the healthcare space too. Yes, please.
Just to kind of support what you're saying, one of the most popular newspaper column used to be the Ask the Sexpert. If you remember, Dr. Vatsa, Mahendra Vatsa, who we knew very, very closely. I've worked with him for so many years. He passed away very recently at the age of 92, 93. His column in Mumbai Mirror was celebrated across India because people were able to ask him very simple questions. Sometimes we used to laugh. And he wrote a book. His last book is It's Normal. And yes, sex is normal. Of course it is. But we often then, in normalizing, we forget to talk about the basic reason, and that's pleasure. And for both the partners, for all the partners. And I think it's extremely important that we need to have these conversations, that why people get into sex or sexuality is basically very closely intertwined with being yourself, and being sexual is being happy. That is very important conversation. I mean, it's not, no, when we say normal, we hide the pleasure aspect of it. I think everyone has a right to pleasure, everyone, regardless of the outcomes, which may, and to protect themselves against the outcomes that they don't want to. So I think I absolutely second what you just said, that normalizing sex conversations, accepting that as a part of, integral part of everybody's life. And when I say even being asexual is as rightful as being sexually active, both, everything is normal. I think those are the conversations that we must get into without any, you can say, being judged about it. That's and that internet, that anonymity, that kind of judgment free space, only internet can provide. It cannot happen in a group meeting. It cannot happen where you are yourself. People are so scared. So I think that is a space which is where it's waiting for us to explore and find a solution in Indian context. When there can be so much pornography, why we can't have sexual health related information, content, and richness and variety of content which can be used by everybody who had access to internet, language, content, everything. I hope I'm making it clearer.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think, a lot of people, when they think about sex education, they probably get their sex education through porn, and that needs to change, right? Like there needs to be more sex positive content that can be cherished and that can be consumed very normally. So I think that's also like that's a place where people who are watching and who are entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, can think about making a difference in just working on the education piece as well and normalizing that. And I do have a quick recommendation for those watching. If you want to hear a good podcast on this topic, on women's health topic, There's something called She Says She's Fine by Dr. Munjal Kapadia. And he talks about everything from, just contraception, PCOS, endometriosis, to sexual health disorders. And you would really enjoy learning about these things. And, so just my personal recommendation to those who are looking to just continue to engage on this theme in the future. So I think um, I've been told that we have to wrap up this session. And I think this was a very, very interesting conversation. So I'm just going to quickly wrap it up. We obviously started by talking about the overall state of outcomes, when it comes to women health in India, and how we still have a long way to go. We uncovered the structural challenges, that are creating these challenges, or issues such as lack of nutrition, ranging from all the way from menstrual health and education to sexual and reproductive health and education. And then we talked specifically about the ecosystem for access, right? And in that we talked about access to screening, access to medical health professionals, access to biomedical solutions, both for rural women as well as that disparity that exists. And finally, we started discussing and had a really enriching discussion on the solutions, improving awareness, and how they can leverage digital health models to provide vernacular content and access. We talked about a very important topic, which is just lack of research in women health issues. And we discussed some resources that you can tap into if you are the one who's innovating on these challenges. We talked about the importance of spending more time in thinking about just women's mindset, the conditioning that happens from a young age as well. And then finally, we talked about the role of state policy, how health is a state subject and needs, good on-ground implementation in collaboration with enabling policies. And then I think finally, we've talked about what the Startup India ecosystem looks like. And Dr. Vishakha gave some really interesting resources for those who are looking to set up, biomedical or look agnostic space, and making enabling this very important discussion and bringing your perspectives to the table about this. If you have any parting thoughts, I would just open it up to you as well.
I think you have nicely summarized everything, Mehak, what we discussed in this. But if there are any more questions, then I think we can take them offline also if we need to respond to any participants who have any questions. Then I know that we are short of time now, but if there are any questions, then do send them to us and we should be able to get back to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, also I add to that and just add my email to everyone who's listening who would like to write to us. We will be very happy to work with you and collaborate with you or just kind of answer questions. And I think this is one of the many conversations. This is a new area of collaboration technology. We should have many more such discussions. Those are the kind of conversations, and we can share them. We have those problems. So a lot of things are already now in the pipeline and going, and let's keep this conversation flowing. Thank you very much for this great session. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah, so a big thank you, Dr. Kalpana, Dr. Vishakha, and Mehak for this extremely insightful discussion. I am sure the audience today got a ground reality of the challenges surrounding women health, specifically for the underserved, as well as innovation opportunities. And those additional resources that you were mentioning about were certainly helpful. Coming up next, we have two sessions around the value of tech-based advisory in the eyes of the farmer and a masterclass on catalyzing rural micro-entrepreneurship. You can also meet Stephanie from GIZ and Azhar and Hira on the Incubators Roundtable in the networking lounges. So please do head over there. And to the audience, if you want to get connected to any of the panelists, please feel free to do so over the Hubilo platform. So thanks to all who joined us, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.